Welcome to Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aevi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Leuven Paulus from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Professor Emeritus Paul Ponsaers. Paul Ponsaers is Professor Emeritus of Criminology at Ghent University in Belgium, where he joined the Department of Criminology, Criminal Law and Social Law. He was founder and director of the research group Social Analysis of Security. He is interested in a wide variety of topics, among others the police as an institution, policing in general, urban safety and white-collar crime. Professor Paul Ponsaers played a pivotal role in developing the Belgian Police Statistics and in making a federal crime and victimization survey possible in the 1990s. He holds a degree in sociology and criminology. This interview was conducted on the 23rd of June 2023.
Welcome, Paul Ponsaers. It's a pleasure to have you here in our podcast.
Welcome, Paul. Very pleased to have you here on our podcast.
I'm glad to be here, and it's nice to hear from you.
Thank you for joining us. And as you know, we're going straight to the point. So we used to open to break the ice and the discussion with a question about how would you define criminology in your country?
Oh, it's a very difficult question. If I look to the origins of criminology in Belgium, you can say that in the 20s about the origins was in fact criminology was a very supportive, broad educational program for different professionals in the domain of penal law, penal administration, lawyers, clinical psychiatrists, magistrates, prison directors, and these kind of things, police officers. In other words, in fact, it was a professional education. And teaching personnel stemmed from other faculties within what they called a school of criminology. But in other words, criminology in itself didn't exist as an institution. It was a kind of mixture, combination of different personnel stemming from other faculties. And in essence, in other words, they had also their own education. They were lawyers or psychologists or psychiatrists and these kind of things. And in fact, they were looking, all of them, to the same object, which was crime. And therefore, they called it criminology. In other words, it was to a large extent criminology was seen as a multidisciplinary science, very much directed towards the labor market. In 1965, this changed. And in other words, until then, criminology was purchased by students as a second diploma. So they were lawyers, and additionally, they were studying criminology. Or lawyers or some psychologists, or I don't know what, different educational programs, initial educational programs. And in other words, founding fathers of criminology in Belgium, as for example Nico Gunsberg at Ghent University, who was a lawyer and the first head of the School of Criminology at that moment, was very interested, not as a lawyer, not only in law in the books, I would say, but also in law in action, what happens in fact within society. So there was a social involvement, an inspiration towards how do criminals come about? That was the question, in fact, behind. And in fact, it was all a discussion about responsibility of people who committed criminal acts, and to what extent this was influenced by societal circumstances and so on. And this makes also that the importance of teaching personnel, they were magistrates, they were lawyers, they were advocates, barristers, and they had a mixture of academic interest and also an interesting practice. It was later on that other sciences came into the landscape. I remember my former mentor, Leuven University. He was a sociologist, and that was completely new within the framework of criminology. He was in fact a sociologist of labor. But in other words, he was not stemming from the profession of the penal administration. That is the origin. Is this clear enough?
Yeah, it's very clear, but maybe for our listeners, it would be good to elaborate a little bit on the background of Leuven University and how he got into criminology and how that influenced you and criminological thinking, because that's a story that people in Belgium know, but probably our listeners abroad have no idea about.
Yeah, I was a student in sociology. In fact, in first instance, I did my studies in sociology, in social sciences, at Leuven University, and Lode was working over there, Lode van Utrecht, and he asked me if I would do my PhD with him as a promoter. And at the same time, I was wondering, and I had in fact the same questions as those founding fathers, how do people become deviant? I mean, what is behind that kind of strange world that we observe? So I studied criminology additionally. Yeah. But in fact, if you call me, you ask me what is your origin, I say sociologist. Yeah. At that time, you must know that in fact, criminology was largely inspired by etiological frameworks, and it was Lode who, in fact, introduced into the criminological field in Belgium all the thinking about symbolic interactionism on the one hand, and also a more critical, radical, you could say, criminology. And of course, being my mentor, he influenced me. This is not strange. In other words, there were changes, and it were not only, this makes that the position of those people who were looking to the deviant were not only professionals anymore, but were also people stemming from other sciences and who had, in fact, well, the same question, but not from a question of the practice of a profession. Yeah. If you see what happens today, you can say that you asked me to define criminology. Today it is a very broad discipline in our country. You must know, I just looked it up for this conversation. We have in Belgium for the moment 1,900, not in Belgium, in Flanders, only in Flanders, 1,900 subscriptions, 1,900 subscriptions. In the first year of the bachelor degree, there are 650 students. So this is quite massive. This is quite massive. And still, the educational program is strongly directed toward the labor market. If there wouldn't be a labor market, criminology would shrink. And nevertheless, everybody tells me that the number of students is still growing. In other words, they find the labor market can absorb them. But there has been a change of people who are studying criminology. Today, people who are studying criminology are much more governance directed, management directed, are in positions within the prison system, within the police, within a lot of different sectors, but in fact are not practicing anymore as practitioners within those institutions. They are in staff functions, and this makes quite a difference. Yeah, but of course there are quite a lot of links to that same labor market. Our students do internships, and for a quite extended period within specific sectors of the labor market, for specific professions. In other words, criminology became more and more in our country an autonomous science, not an additional science anymore, not a support science for other sciences. No, an autonomous science, but still interdisciplinary, which teaching personnel were becoming more and more themselves criminologists, because they were in fact have been taught in criminology, and so they were not migrants anymore from other disciplines. They were migrants within their own domain, which makes it quite different. Today we have faculties, and within those faculties we have, as I said, strong departments of criminology. Most of the time it are faculties of law. Today, most of the time, I think, in fact, all of them are called not anymore faculty of law, but faculty of law and criminology. Yeah. Most of those institutions in Flanders, in the Flemish-speaking part of the country, all universities have a solid, full program, full curriculum in bachelor degrees, master degrees, and PhD degrees, which is not the case in the French-speaking part of the country, because in the French-speaking part of the country, they still are on the same track as in the former days, in fact. And so it is very much in Liège and Louvain-la-Neuve, an additional program for people stemming from a first educational program. But we see today also is an important internationalization. Students are going abroad. Research groups have strong collaborations with research groups in other countries, and so on. And that's, I think, important. Still consulted for this conversation. I saw that criminology is still today, and I was wondering, because you never know, one of the 3 strongest rises at university level. So this is a very strange situation. For example, in the French-speaking University of Brussels, you have a seminar of about 40 students who are doing criminology in the first year, in the first bachelor year. We have 650, which is quite a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know if you realize that the history of criminology in Belgium is quite unique, because the fact that it was created almost as a professional education, so you would get a job, is quite unique. If you look, for example, at the countries that introduced criminology recently, like Spain, Portugal, I'm not sure about what you say, that if the market was not there, maybe there's a cultural difference. But for example, in Spain and in Portugal, they have hundreds of students in criminology. They have much more than they could get. There are now in Portugal several private universities that take the guys that cannot make it. The online universities in Spain, they have also 300-400. Of course, it's bigger, the country, but proportionally you still have more. But it's quite unique, and it's not mentioned enough. Even when you look at the country profile in the European Journal of Criminology, I think that this is because when you are inside the country, you don't realize how particular this history it is. But outside, there's always a problem. What are you going to do? Where are you going to work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. But nevertheless, I see those differences between different countries. But it is an advantage and is a disadvantage at the same time, of course. The number of students is much hindering teaching personnel in doing their research program to a large extent. If I look to Leuven, who is Belgian, he can better answer the question than me, of course, because this is a very heavy duty, educational duty you have. Yeah. And at the same time, running a research group is not evident anymore. That's one thing. And the other thing is that if I look to Spain and Portugal, the development of our educational program is quite different. Spain, for example, is to a large extent much still a law program.
Yeah.
Our program is to a large extent, and I would say strongly and evidently, is a social science program, which is a completely different point of view. And most of the people, there is, of course, an important component of penal law, but it is a component. And if we do research, from a social science point of view, and an empirical, not a normalistic point of view, in which is quite different.
Yeah. It's a difference, and I was thinking also in the French-speaking regions. So. As you mentioned, in the French-speaking part of Belgium, of course, there is Liège and there is something in Brussels, but not a full program. In France, we receive in Switzerland a lot of people from France. Mm-hmm. And I think what changed in Lausanne is that Martin Kilias came with a completely different point of view, because he has been in the United States and he came with an empirical view, and that made the difference. Because otherwise, in the French-speaking countries or regions of countries, there's still a lot to do, and there is some reticence from the part of, especially in France, from the establishment.
Yeah, but it is a big difference. If you look to criminology in France, I know quite a lot of friends from Journe, the European network, French-speaking European network, which is active within the domain of criminology, but they don't call themselves criminologists. And there's a specific reason, because criminology are considered in France as, in fact, an helping and supportive science for example, police. And in fact, as a prolongation of these kind of professions. While in Belgium, this is not the case anymore.
So you talk about the connotation of criminology as being like it used to be in Belgium, an auxiliary science of law, social control apparatus. This is the main reason why criminologists in France don't want to be labeled as criminologists. And this may also explain the differences between the Flemish and the Walloon part in
Yeah, this is very strange. I must say I don't see the exact reason. But in fact, what we did in Flanders was reformulating our program in bachelor and master degrees because of Bologna. And we were in front of the question, do you want a full-sized, solid educational program or not? And we decided to do it. And we had enough students to make this step.
It was in 2004 for our listeners, the Bologna agreement. That's correct.
Yeah. But in the Walloon part of the country, they were not very convinced. And it was also, you must say, because we cannot have numerous fixes in our educational program, as they do, for example, in the Netherlands. They say, that's the maximum level of students we will have. No, we cannot. But this is not allowed. In other words, they were afraid of being overwhelmed by a massive amount of students and not being able anymore, which is in fact to a large extent what happens in Flanders, to do solid research anymore. You see?
Yeah.
So this was a different choice given by other cultural standards, but I don't judge it. I just observe it that there is quite a difference.
But what is funny, and we should ask Leuven to Laurent Mukeli the day we make an interview with him, because in 1994 he published this book, Histoire de la criminologie française, History of French Criminology, and then in 2004 he published the article L'impossible constitution d'une discipline criminologique en France, the impossibility of creating criminology in France.
That's true.
So this we have to discuss with him. And as I told you, we have the same limit. We cannot put numerus clausus in Switzerland, and then we get a lot of French students.
Yeah, but take care. There is an important difference. In France, a lot of people which are working within the domain of criminology, of crime, of deviancy, are working within governmental institutions. That's not the case in Belgium. There's only one National Institute of Criminalistics and Criminology. That's the only one. And it is a very small group of criminologists which is working there. All the rest is working at universities. This is not the case in France. So most of them are considered as being governmental criminologists. And this gives another kind of perception, of course. Yeah.
But it's funny because they are always criticized, or that's always, I'm exaggerating, they are quite often criticizing power, but they work for the power.
Yes, of course. And if they are criticizing, they have the risk that their budgets are cut down and so forth. I don't have to explain.
Yeah.
So in other words, there is a kind of balance, but because of the fact that we don't have that much universities in Belgium. What do we have? We have in Flanders, Ghent, we have Leuven, we have Brussels, and Antwerp. Antwerp has no curriculum in criminology as a security science program. So, in other words, the 3 Flemish universities have their own specific, solid criminology program. In the French-speaking part of the country, Liège, Louvain-la-Neuve.
They have a small program there, eh? Not the full program. Eh?
No. And the ULB, the Brussels University, French-speaking university, has a minor program, you could say. Yeah? And that was their choice, as I explained already. But in other words, what happened in Flanders is a very strange kind of thing. Because in Flanders we are producing, being clear, a kind of layer within the administration of the penal administration of people who are working within governance of these problems of prisons, of police, and so on. Most of the time, there are no policemen, there are no directors of prisons. They can be criminologists too, but most of the time they are working in different places, but have a quite important critical underground. And in other words, they are not working only in Flanders, they are working in the whole country, which is a very strange kind of effect. This is very, very strange. If you see to what's happening in the Walloon part of the country, more than 50% of the criminologists who are starting criminology are social workers, which is a completely other kind of profile for students. And in other words, they don't go to governance functions. They are working as social workers with a specialization. And in other words, they still are on a track of clinical criminology. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's one question about this difference, since you have been teaching for many years at Ghent University. You know the situation in Flanders and, of course, in Wallonia very well. Do you think that there is some advantage as well of keeping the educational program restricted to a master program, because it's a 2-year master program? Does it have advantages with regard to conducting research and having time to teach in depth and prepare PhD students for a career as a researcher? Because I have the impression now that, given the growing success of criminology everywhere in Belgium, that we have to invest a lot, or maybe too much, as my opinion, in teaching first bachelor students, which decreases the time we have for teaching at a higher level. So maybe we make the wrong choices.
The disadvantage of the new system, of course. In Belgium, in any case, I think that's true. And to a large extent, if this goes together with restraining policy on the budgetary level, and your assistants and support personnel are diminishing, you have a very strange kind of position at a certain moment. You cannot do that anymore at the same with the same intensity and the same quality. So there is the risk. Of course, there is a risk.
Yeah, let's see what the future brings. But as long as there is work, as you mentioned, people will keep coming. And even if there is no work, we have to see how it would work.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we discussed about education, but also the history of criminology in Belgium is quite interesting. And as you are an expert in statistics, among many other things, I thought that perhaps we could talk a little bit about the origins of the criminal statistics of Belgium since the creation of the country with Quetelet, and how they evolved, because I think that fashioned also a little bit the way in which people studied crime.
Yeah, sure. I must say this is to a certain extent linked to my own professional career. After my studies in Leuven and my defense of my PhD there with Leuven University, I became for a few years journalist, following, in fact, judicial matters. And at a certain moment, how did they find me? I don't know. But the Minister of Interior called me and asked me, why don't you come over to the department to develop some statistical instruments? And you must know that at that time, the political class was in fact preparing the idea of reshufflement, reform of the police. And Mr. Louis Tobak at that time, he said to me, we don't even know how much police officers are here in this country. So the tradition of Quetelet disappeared for a long time.
Yeah, this is incredible. Why do you think it disappeared? Because it was very strong. Everybody cites Quetelet. He's known, there's written about Quetelet in every criminology textbook. And then all of a sudden, there is no interest in criminal statistics. It's kind of an implosion. What's the reason behind it?
Yeah, but we must not jump to conclusions. There was the Statistical Institute of Belgium who produced, as in former days, crime statistic, but still on the basis of what Quetelet founded. But in the meanwhile, you had different police forces who are verbalizing, who are making files on different kind of crimes, but all this information was never brought together. You had, in other words, there was a statistic of the Gendarmerie Nationale, there was a statistic of the municipal police, and there was a statistic of the criminal justice police. And this was not integrated at any level.
Now I think I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. So the national statistics were always, let's say, court and prosecution statistics.
Yeah.
As in the beginning with Quetelet, they remained like that, and then when the police forces were created, there was no development of police statistics.
No.
Okay.
So you had to start anew, and you had to make a new database, because there was no other solution. And this went together at a certain moment with the digitalization of information. So we started to gather the information in digital way, which was not done. It was in writing before. Yeah. So.
But that is already the 80s, at least, no?
Yeah, sure. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. But in other words, this was a period in which we tried to get a more solid grip on what was filed by the police, which is registered crime.
Yeah.
Making the Minister of Interior clear that this was not the exact mirror of reality is another question, of course, because at a certain moment he has his figures, yeah, but then you say, no, this is only what is registered by the police or by the different police forces. There is a large amount of dark number, of course. And then he said, well, what do I have then? Yeah, this was a difficult debate.
Yeah, but then you also introduced the idea of the victimization surveys.
Yeah, in fact, we did different things. We had this kind of morphology of the police services in plural. We had a crime statistic which we developed. We developed also a survey, a population survey, who gathered information on what people reported being victimized and tried to compile that and combine that with our crime statistics. In fact, to a large extent, inspired by what was done by the Home Office in England, the British Crime Survey at that moment, and also what happened in the Netherlands. And which permitted also to make international comparisons, of course. And so at a certain moment, that same minister started to have a certain comprehension of what happened in this country.
Yeah, so the monitor was also there, the what is called the Belgian monitor, which is many of the people that launched these victim surveys then worked a lot with that data, like Jan van Dijk or Pat Mayhew.
Yeah.
And of course, you published about that, but you didn't take full advantage of the databases that you created. You were creating things and then continuing. I have the impression it's not that you said, okay, now I'm going to show the picture of crime in Belgium according to all these indicators.
Well, what we tried to do that, but we had a very small research group at the Department of Interior, and we had to defend our scientific integrity, of course.
Yeah,
in that
but you published with
environment which was not evident at all.
Yeah, and you publish with the department. I mean, you could have used this in a more, let's say, selfish way, if you wish, and publish journal articles. But you always work as a team player with the team of the ministry. That I found quite impressive. Or was my impression, at least.
No. What we did was, in fact, producing statistics with a team, which was a very small one, about 20 people, in these different areas.
Yeah.
Which was civil personnel, and which was hired specifically for the production of those statistics. So we had a quite autonomous space within the departments. But of course, one way or another, we were financed by the Ministry of Interior, and so one way or another, you had to explain what we were doing.
Yeah, but it's quite impressive because I think all this information, of course, is published in the local languages. And then it's not easy, and we don't have an easy access to it. For example, all the publications by the Home Office about the British Crime Survey, they are online. A lot of people consult them.
But they write in English, eh?
Yeah, of course.
The Belgium reports of that time were already in English. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That all this is published in the local languages, and then people have difficulties accessing.
Sure.
And this limits a lot the scope, in my opinion, the development of criminology, because it's always very Anglo-Saxon centered.
Yeah.
Because the ideas come from there, and through Leuven, I discovered a lot of things that you published, but in Flemish, for example, that are quite interesting, but that are not of easy access.
Of course, and that's a big problem. But that's precisely because of the work overload. At a certain moment, you are happy having a report that you can present to the commander of the research, and then you have written it in Dutch.
Yeah.
Making then again an English version of it, which we did sometimes, but not very often, because there was no time for doing it.
Yeah. But it's really a pity, and the Germans now publish the small like a key findings of their statistics. They read more than key findings, but not the whole statistics. But I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, sure. But do you compare now Belgium with Germany? I mean, this is a small country. This is a very small country. What we have as possibilities, I think we exploited as much as possible what we could do. Honestly, I really think so. We couldn't do any more.
No, you did a lot. I mean, you did a lot of things. I'm just saying, what a pity that this is not translated. Someone could translate at least some, like at least a collection of essays. It would help us understand victimization in other countries. You know?
This was possible the moment I stepped over to the university, and when it became possible to have more publication possibilities. But at that moment, your focus of interest was broadening at the same time. I was looking to police questions, I was looking to financial and economic crime, and so on. And my interest was also broadening, of course, in that academic setting. And I had not the intention to limit myself anymore to that criminalistic question.
Yeah. So it's always the wrong time, wrong place.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, I mean, I'm surprised discovering the amount of things that are done in Belgium, but especially in the Flemish region. If it was in the Walloon area, for me it would be easier because I speak French, so I could get them. But sure. I mean, it is quite impressive, really. And also, but I know this is not your area at all, but they discover, so you have Kettelet in 1831 with the first statistics, and you have the creation of the new statistics. In the middle, during the, let's say the biological period with Lombroso, Leuven told me that there was also like a Belgium equivalent of Lombroso, that is not well known also in outside of Belgium, I think.
Louis Verbraak.
Ah, yeah, but this was not a person who had the same impact as Lombroso, you know.
No.
But he was there working. I didn't know that it was this period. So you have like on the one side the people that continue studying statistics plus the biological studies, then psychology. Is quite impressive, the amount of things.
Yes, but of course, I told you how the Belgian criminology came about, and in fact, it were enlightened liberals, enlightened social democrats, enlightened Christian democrats to a large extent, who were looking to society as an instance who produced crime.
Yeah.
This was a very, very new kind of idea. And it was not linked to an ideology. It was linked to a humanistic point of view of what's happening in society and how do we produce, in fact, criminality. Yeah, that was the original question of these enlightened persons. And so they were going abroad. Nico Gunsberg, the founding father of criminology at Ghent University, he has a very international career. And he was teaching also in the States. So it was not someone, those people were not limited by national boundaries at all. Yeah. Which has changed to a large extent in the meanwhile.
Yeah. And then there's another aspect that is interesting, which is the impact on criminal policy, on social policies. And there is also a tradition in Belgium. Well, you said that the ministry went to look for you to help them develop the statistics, and several persons that we interviewed at one moment or the other were advisors to the government. Which would be the impact? I know, for example, for a drug policy, at one moment there was a program of heroin prescription. But how do you see this impact on criminal policy?
I think you cannot underestimate it. I think the importance of what we teach to criminological students and going to the labor market is quite important. And because those hosts are at that moment, in those different working spaces, are also often criminologists. So they speak the same language. They understand each other. Yeah? It took quite some time before this kind of evolution took place. But today there is a common language, and for instance, mediation, restorative justice, and these kind of expressions are everyday words used in daily practice. I think an important cultural change which took place.
Yeah, the fact that they have a common language is changes everything. At the same time, so you have the restorative justice program, the mediation programs. I don't know what happened with the drug policy, because I think it was a test, these heroin prescription programs, but it was inspired by the experiences abroad. And at the same time, you have we were discussing yesterday, I think, like a punitive turn also in criminal policy. And these differences.
That's true, and also in Belgium this is the case. The populist undertone becomes stronger and stronger. But that's precisely the reason why, for example, magistrates in Belgium, lawyers, instructors, and this kind of people, they often are also criminologists. So in other words, they have a very septic view towards this kind of populistic reasoning.
Yeah.
So, and that's the result of an evolution, not the beginning of an evolution.
Yeah.
And in other words, the functioning of our penal administration, to a large extent, I'm sure of that, also that at the top of the police organizations, is to a large extent influenced by this cultural bath, which is called criminology.
Yeah. And do you think there are differences? Because, for example, in Switzerland, people think the Latins are more open, more tolerant. But when you look at it in practice, the people from the German-speaking region of Switzerland are much more open and much less punitive than the Latins in the French-speaking part or the Italian part. Do you think there are differences also in Belgium according to the region?
Well, I don't know. I don't know really. But what I see is that, in fact, if you talk about political affiliation, extreme right wing party at Vlaams Belang, the biggest party for the moment in the polls in Flanders.
Influence, yeah.
Yeah. While in the French-speaking part, the most important riser is the Communist Party, the PTB. So there is, of course, quite some difference between both parts of the country. But nevertheless, but that's political affiliation. But nevertheless, there is also a cultural affiliation within those institutions, which makes it amortize this kind of populistic reasoning, and which is saying this is not what we want. You see?
I see. And another thing that also interests us is how crime evolved during your lifetime. How
oh, Jesus, what a question. Oh, crime is what we call crime, and it's what is defined by penal law. In essence, criminal law is defining what kind of behavior is called crime. In other words, we are depending from that point of view to what the legislator is defining crime. And of course, there is quite some difference. I remember the time that we started crime statistics at the Department of Interior. Petty crime was the most important thing. Because at that moment, it was massive, it was hindering most of the people. And during our monitoring, people said, that's what we want to be combated. In the meanwhile, more and more, also myself, I am convinced that other forms of crime became much more important. As for example, just to call one thing, terrorism, financial and economic crime, not perhaps because of the massiveness in frequency, but in seriousness, and impacting on a social level. So you cannot count crime. You have to include also the seriousness. And of course, from that point of view, there is an immense change, of course. There is an immense change. At the same time, going together with the digital society, which makes crime more and more global, of course, and not bounded to national borders anymore. In other words, crime has changed fundamentally, I think. And this is one of the challenges Criminological Institute has, to try to follow that path, of course, and to try to see what's happening today and in the future. And that means that you cannot avoid to talk about predictive policing, for example. That you cannot avoid to see what artificial intelligence will bring us in the future. And these kind of things. In other words, criminology is a very conservative science, in fact, from that point of view, because it is defined in the past and the development is in the future.
Yeah. Like life, you live it forward and you understand it backward.
Because it works that way. We are human beings, aren't we?
Yeah. But also with the surveys, you surely measure insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
And I have the impression that that also changed a lot from the 80s to the 2020s in, let's say, the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I don't know. Insecurity is not anymore fear of crime, I think.
Ah, nice. That's interesting. Tell us.
Yeah, insecurity is much more defined in different areas of our daily life, financially, on the health level. Think of COVID and these kind of things. In other words, insecurity became a kind of global notion, and people feel endangered. War situations in Ukraine. In other words, people don't feel insecure anymore, feel unsafe, feel have fear, but not by necessity of crime anymore. Yeah, and of course, precisely that, those different climate change and these kind of things, they all go together today. Yeah, and this makes an accumulation and gives birth to complot theories, conspiracy theories, and makes that people are invaded by these kind of fears. So in other words, we cannot talk as a criminologist anymore about fear of crime without having a good apprehension of what's surrounding this kind of insecurity feelings. I'm really convinced of that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. One thing that sometimes I ask my students is about sleeping with the door open. You know, the house of the door, and this, for example, in Switzerland, changed a lot in two generations. It was very common to have people not putting the key on the door, and I wonder what happened there. Partly, probably there are more. There's a little bit more crime, but also partly probably the press, the media help developing that. I don't know. There is a change there in how crime is perceived also. But now you open the discussion, which is quite much interesting too.
Yeah, but I think that's because of the fact that people are consulting by social media, by all these different applications they use, and with which they live daily. They see those kind of dangers, and they feel them.
Yeah.
And in other words, I wouldn't sleep anymore without locking my door.
You have seen this change, but this is, and why do you? Why would you not close? Would you close the door every day?
Because it's a pure subjective feeling, of course, but I don't want to take a risk.
Yeah.
Which does not mean that I feel insecure, but I don't want to take the risk.
Yeah, even the perception of insecurity is not only on crime, also on the way we drive. I mean, my father used to take me in the car, of course, without the belt. That is the late 70s. I mean, I was born in 66. We were he had a brake, so we were in the back of the car playing without any problem. I would go to school by bus with 10 years without any problem. So it's difficult to, maybe it's that we don't want to take the risk. Maybe we became more conscientious that the risk exists even if it is low.
Yeah, but even that's precisely the point. Even if the risk is not frequent, but it can be serious.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of apprehension of if there is someone entering, which is not very probably, but even if there's someone, then the risk is serious.
Yeah.
So there's another kind of appreciation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, the insurance companies insist a lot on the responsibilities that you must take. There are a lot of campaigns. It's not only the mass media, but also I mean, I receive from, you know that in Switzerland we are over insurance. So you get all the time advice on what to do and what not to do. And all this clearly does not help either.
Also, yeah. No.
Okay, and about, if we talk about the criminals, do you see any difference on who are today the authors compared to 50 years ago?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think the scope has much broadened. Yeah. In early days, it was a dangerous class, being short. Shortly. Today, everyone is potential criminal. And everyone is not criminal, but is potential criminal. Yeah. And also, the corrupt parliamentarian in the European Parliament, and also other kind of people, politicians which are corrupt, and so on. In other words, there is a good a solid understanding in society that crime is not the privilege of a specific class anymore.
Yeah. Corruption is a major.
I think criminology has added to a large extent to that comprehension.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think corruption in the political and the politicians is something that would deserve more study, because what I see throughout Europe is that people are having less and less confidence in their politicians, probably because of some of these scandals.
Yeah,
and that is why the populists get easy. I don't know. It's my personal feeling. That's it.
Yeah, but there are different. There are always different causes working together to this kind of evolution. Also, the fact that in most European countries we have more and more political parties to form a coalition and to have a majority. That you have more and more small extremist parties within the range of parties in a country, and that there is competition between those parties, and often people are saying they are more busy with the competition between those different groups and parties than with the needs of the population. So, in other words, this translates itself in questioning the democratic fundamentals of a society, of course. And it's not only because of criminality, it is because of the fact that the fundamentals of democracy in our European Western society is at danger, I think. And we have some examples in Europe where there is really an outburst. Hungary, just to call one example, where, in other words, the political class is not only endangered by corruption, because that's clear criminal behavior, but also at the same time with the confidence people have in their politicians, which is something else.
But it's a hard time for enlightening criminal policies when you have all these divisions. I mean, changing
not only politicians, but public trust and science is also, all decline. If you look at surveys, due to also the fact that even false data have been used and so on. So I think all these developments show that crime is just everywhere, and we require new methods, new ideas, new frameworks to study the phenomenon in comparison to the traditional ways.
Yeah, that's true. So from that point of view, it is a stimulator, right? Mm-hmm. These kind of evolutions to think further. But it is clear also at the same time that we don't have developed already, but we should know. We should know more. That's quite clear. So let's not be too confident about our knowledge. We have to know much more.
It's something that deserves to be really studied, because it's changing the way I think criminal policy is being produced. It's changing also the confidence in democracy and democratic solutions. But okay, that will take us.
Yeah, but okay. Can I give you an example? In earlier days, I remember some criminologists who were saying we have to change the population in prison. And it should not only be those people who are deprived that should be in prison. We should change, in other words, population. But we teach in criminology in Belgium, in any case, and I think in quite a lot of different other European countries, is to say, let's abolish the prison. That's another kind of point of view. And let's develop other means to retribute crime. And that's a completely other kind of mental reconversion we have to make. So the question is not to change the population of the prison. The prison should be abolished.
But do you think there is any chance of abolishing prison in the medium, even in the long term? Let's say maybe in the very, very long term we can discuss. But do you think that is realistic as an approach?
Oh, I don't know. I try to imagine such a kind of world, and I think today it is not thinkable, of course. But on the other hand, why not start from other concepts as reparation, restoration, and these kind of ideas that only revenge? Because in fact, in essence, what is crime? What do we do with criminals? Enclose them because they will not do it again? We know, all of us know that they will do it again, and that the recidivism is bigger within the prison population than the outside. So what do we do? What do we do? It's not a matter of morals or ethics. It is a matter of reasonability and being clear about where do we strive for. And don't we have other means than putting people away behind walls?
I fully understand what you mean. I think that and Belgium in this case is quite advanced, because you have a restorative justice and mediation introduced. I think that for the the less serious crimes and medium serious crimes, this can work. Maybe for the most serious crimes, or maybe for there are psychopaths in the population, so maybe we should reduce the
but we shouldn't put them in prison. We should put them in
hospitals, mental health. I discussed once. I remember discussing it with Luc Hulsman, because at one time we were together in the Deviance Société board, and he told me that that it was interesting. That he realized that it was that he was not naive. He was not saying we're going to abolish the penal system tomorrow, but that it was interesting to think about how a community would solve a problem if prison was not there. And that I found a fruitful way of thinking about that. Of course, it was different. When you read it, he's much more radical. But when you discuss with him, it was like a little bit different approach.
Our good friend Luke.
Yeah. But I mean, to change that, you would need also a different kind of education, because people are convinced. I see the debates. For example, we mentioned Spain, that they introduced a new law that changed the minimum length of sentences for sexual abuses, which is quite high in Spain. Like rape is 6, minimum 12. And that created a whole scandal that they were being too lenient. So it's difficult to change the way people think.
Yeah, but we think that as criminologists, but being clear. I remember once we did a research on the files which were filed by the police, but was registered. How many files are registered by the police? And the second question was then, within that database, we were looking what happened with those files within the penal administration. You know how many files came before court? Without a question of guilty or innocent, 4.2%. In other words, what are we doing? Of course the system is selective. We know that, yeah, and we know where the selectiveness is. But I remember very well the moment that we presented that research, I was called by a politician to ask not to mention that too loudly. That politician was even also a colleague, a scientist.
But do you think, because in Switzerland it's similar, the percentage, but that is because now with the new system that we have since 2011, the prosecutors have a lot of power and can solve all sentences that are less than 6 months can be solved by the prosecutors.
In fact, in other words, Marcelo, why I tell you that, it is because we are doing it already, but you should not say it loudly.
Yeah.
And the people which are in prison, more of half of them are in provisional custody, waiting for their process and not condemned.
That's a very interesting way of seeing things, that in practice this is already being done, but we are not aware of that. And because people...
It should not be said loudly because of the populist voice which is there.
Yeah. Yeah, the issue of attrition is always talked with selected words that make it much more difficult to understand what you're saying. Yeah, but it's a very nice way of putting the problem clearly, presenting the problem clearly. Now, it's true, the selection is already there, even if
even more. That selection is there because we have criminologists in those positions who can do it.
Yeah, because they are aware of selection effects because they have been taught criminology.
It is a public secret.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. But nevertheless, I think it remains a challenge for criminological research and practice to decide how to deal with crime in the future. My personal impression is that we just aren't too creative. I mean, we just keep relabeling the same kind of practices using other words, but basically we don't seem to have a lot of imagination to come up with constructive solutions.
No, that's true.
Maybe a bit pessimistic, but that's how I see it.
No, I completely agree. On the other hand, science can only be a science when it is cumulative, in other words, building on the past. So it's always that same kind of going forward and a step back and then a step forward. So I'm not optimistic, but I'm not pessimistic neither, in other words. I think we are making progress.
Yeah, and that's a positive way of closing a little bit the discussion. Yeah, a nice way of presenting it, and how to explain it to the public without. Well, for example, when we did the study on attrition on domestic violence in Switzerland, it's even less than 4%. It's a little bit more than 2% that arrived to the currently, and in the cases of domestic violence, it was 8%. So it was 4 times more. So it's a huge difference, but when you explain it, it's very difficult because it's still 8%. So they tell you, and then 92% disappear. Huh? Well, some are sentenced by the sentence, sanctioned by the prosecutors, and many of them are threats and things that will never lead a person to prison. But it's a very difficult information to transmit in a way that doesn't. Push people to react, saying the justice system is doing nothing.
Yeah, of course. I understand. That's why that politician was asking me not to say it too loudly.
Yeah. No, that's very good. Yeah. So I think we went through the whole things that we wanted to discuss, Lieven. Am I forgetting something?
No, we did talk about more than all the subjects we were supposed to talk. So I think we have a very rich interview.
And also, we should mention that Paul was your mentor, because we didn't mention it here. So you know him better than anyone. So maybe you have still some questions that could be interesting.
Maybe yes, a final question. What I've always been wondering, you have seen the development of criminology at Ghent University. You have seen both worlds, the academic world and how policy works. You know about the friction between policy and research. Now, what do you think the biggest or one of the key messages would be for criminologists who are now in the same position you were in when you were active at Ghent University? What are the key challenges for you? I mean, if you looking back and looking at the development of criminology, what do you think personally are the most important issues to be dealt with for future generations for the development of criminology in Belgium? Of course, looking from your personal point of view and your experience at Ghent.
Yeah, sure. Oh, there are quite a lot of challenges, but I think one of the most important ones is to fight bureaucracy.
Thank you.
Centralization, restraining measures. If you want to have a free science, then you have to finance free science. And not docile membership of a society which is mute.
Free science is a very interesting topic because it's increasingly difficult to get funded because there is a lot of competition, and I mean the amount of money which is given to research, to criminological research from the Belgian Research Foundation in comparison to other countries is pretty low. So
I don't know if I compare what's happening today. There is much more money going to criminological research than in earlier days. It depends on what you are comparing.
I'm just comparing the amount of money which is given to research in general by the Science Foundation in Belgium in comparison to the Netherlands or Scandinavian countries. In some countries there's more money for independent research. That's my idea.
Yeah, but that's not...
Maybe I'm wrong.
What I meant before is that people, criminologists, have also a public function and should speak out clearly and use their space of debate, which is something else than doing research. Of course, participating in debates should be sustained by empirical research. of course, but it's not enough to do research.
Okay.
Yeah? And so that's what I mean when I talk about free science. Free science is also participating in a societal debate and making clear what we are doing. And perhaps then we get more money.
But this is true. This is something that has changed. If I compare the situation with, for example, 10 to 15, 20 years ago, there were many more criminologists engaged in public debate, but the public debate has become so much polarized that maybe the generation of younger criminologists really don't feel that they want to spend too much time on being caught in this discussion, which is really, quite difficult.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I understand.
I think this is something that's how I feel it when I compare the public role of criminologists nowadays compared to when you were a full professor here and our colleague Bryce de Rijven. Many people were speaking out a lot and being part of the public debate, which I think is an important issue. But the climate has really changed a lot in combination with the huge teaching load. It makes it very difficult. And the media expect much more from you nowadays than 20 years ago. They want solutions. You have to be available at the spot, even on a Sunday afternoon.
But I more and more experience is that if a journalist is calling you, he starts to tell you what you have to say.
Yeah, this is
So if he's an expert, that he says it himself.
Okay, that's a very interesting thing to highlight. That's a change in journalism. I really feel this. When people call us, we need to have an answer, and if it's not the answer they want, they just hang up and ring somebody else.
That's the way they do it. So it has something to do with the quality of the media also.
Yeah. And you know this, of course, because that's for our listeners. You have also, been very active as a journalist as well. Just like the early day criminologists like Robert Park, you were as a journalist doing research at the Morgen, a progressive newspaper in Belgium, and you were doing quite some interesting research back then. For example, the Les Tueurs du Brabant, the killers, the Bende van Nijvel in Dutch. I don't think this kind of research is still possible today.
I published 30 years after my first book on the Brabant killers, a new book on the same issue, and wondering what they changed now within those 30 years. Has there been a gain of knowledge? Disappointing,
Yeah. Do you think they will ever find a solution?
What do you mean now?
Do you think that there will come a time when there will be
they will solve the case?
Yeah, breakthrough in the case, or
no?
It's like Olaf Palme's killing.
In this specific case, I really think that they should stop the investigation and hand over the file to historians to make a serious historical research on it, and it will be much more productive than a pure police investigation. I'm quite convinced of that, and perhaps even. If you start such a kind of historical research, witnesses who are still living, police officers and these kind of things, will tell you more than in this situation when there is still an open judicial inquiry.
Yeah, I never looked at it from that point of view, but it may be an interesting avenue because indeed, where there's still a possibility of prosecution, people who live will probably remain silent. That would be also interesting to study the unsolved case of Olaf Palme in Sweden. The same. I often compare them because there were huge impacts.
At the same mechanisms which are at work.
Yeah, probably. Very, very interesting. Do you have any other final words to future generations of criminologists?
Let me come back to the question of the present, because it's interesting. Last year I made a book about the process of the terrorists in Paris, which were bombing Paris. And in fact, they were quite severely punished, but this makes me wonder. Most of those who were bombing really in Paris are that to the last minute today we don't bury corpses in prisons there. In other words, who was in fact imprisoned for a lifetime? Someone who was not participating in the bombing and he refused to explode his bomb. Abdeslam. Today, during the process in Brussels, the same man, he's pleading innocence, because he never took part in the bombing. Is this not material to rethink imprisonment? I'm quite convinced that such a guy has certain psychological inhibitions for bombing, because he didn't do it. Quite convinced that there is some possibility for integration. I'm not talking about those who are dead, but we are not able to punish them anymore. In other words, such a kind of learning processes as this kind of processes are incredibly valuable, because they can learn us a lot about possibilities. And instead of pleading for a second lifetime sentence, because that's in fact what the public prosecutor is asking in Brussels today, so he has to be in prison twice lifetime. Is this not a possibility to think what is now another possibility? I'm not saying that you should leave him without any problem. I'm saying this is an incredible opportunity to learn. Take that opportunity, of course.
Paul, tell us the name of the book. I've been trying to get it immediately, but I get your bestseller, Le Tueur Fou du Brabant Wallon. That is always there when you Google it. But the book that you published last year, which is the name?
A terreurproces van Parijs.
Okay.
That's in Dutch.
Yeah, that's why I couldn't find it. I didn't get the right keywords. Okay, that's that's good. We will maybe write it down in the presentation when we put it on YouTube. We will write down the name. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us.
It was a very, very pleasant meeting and encounter.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much,
Marcelo, Lieven. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for following Lieven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Guyot. Your host are Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Evi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.